I want to thank you today for joining us with the Khaitan Company Legal Digital Roundup. The purpose of this webinar is to provide some updates on what's happening on India. We have an absolutely fantastic lineup. I've seen some of the slides already. You guys are in for a really good show. Please note that we will have questions and answers later on. So if you can stay off camera for the time being, we'll invite you to come on a little bit later on, and please stay on mute. We will be sharing the slides for everybody to view afterwards. So do not feel like you have to screen scrape or capture those now. They will be made available. With that, I'm really pleased to hand over the microphone to Paku Khan, who will be our moderator today. And with that, Paku, over to you, sir.
Hey, thank you very much, and thanks very much to the U.S.-India Business Council, and thank you to the audience for joining us. I hope everybody is doing well and staying safe. As Jay said, we do these about every 6 weeks to 8 weeks, and because we're going to be covering a wide range of topics, we've tried to do this in a newscast format. So if you will, keeping with that metaphor, Jay and I will be your anchors, and then my colleagues from Khaitan & Co. will be our correspondents or reporters out in the field. Let me go to the next slide, please, and just introduce who our speakers are from Khaitan & Co. And this is pretty much the order in which they're going to take it, and I'll give you an outline. But first of all, from left to right, top to bottom, we have Prasenjit Chakravarti as a corporate partner in our New Delhi office, and we affectionately refer to him as PC. Then we have Roshnik Dalla, who is in our Mumbai office, also in our corporate section. We have Zach Darius Joseph, or Zach as we affectionately refer to him, from our Mumbai office. And then at the bottom, we left to right, we have Tanu Banerjee, also in our Mumbai office, Nishad Nadkarni, and then in Mumbai, and then myself, Paku Khan, in Berkeley. Now let's quickly go to our outline. And as Jay said, we're going to try to cycle through this pretty quickly. All in, we're hoping to be about 40 minutes or so. So we'll take 35 minutes for each of my colleagues to make these presentations, and then we'll take Q&A at the end. And as Jay said, use your chat function on your Teams platform to raise any questions. So starting from the top, we have PC, who's going to be talking about a favorite subject of ours and something that exemplifies everything that's going on in India, and that's what we call the unicorn stampede. Can we go back to the outline, please? Next, we're going to have Roshnik talking about FDI in the commercial space sector. Zach is going to be doing what we call below the radar, or all the news that fits. These are going to be some items that we think are important for the digital economy space between US and India, but you may not have heard about, and we're going to quickly run through a few things that maybe you might be interested in. Then the fourth segment is going to be Tanu covering the latest developments in gaming law, including a Karnataka High Court decision as well as a proposed bill. And then finally, Nishad is going to talk about the Advertising Standards Council of India guidelines on crypto and non-fungible tokens, or NFT ads. So with that, let me turn it over to PC, who's going to take us through our first topic, and that's going to be all about this phenomenon in India called unicorns. PC, over to you.
Thank you very much, Paku. Very good evening, morning, from wherever you have joined in. It's a pleasure to have you. It's a very challenging thing to talk about unicorns in barely 5 minutes, but I will try and do justice to that. The way I will like to split up my talk is in 3 parts. Firstly, come up with some startling statistics and facts, and then I will go with a reason, or some of the key reasons at least, why there's a tremendous boom and surge in India insofar as unicorns are concerned. And thirdly, will it continue and sustain, or is it something which will cave in or will plateau in light of the challenging atmosphere and environment we are today grappling with? So let us start off with some of the facts. As we speak, by 31st of March 2022, India had a startling 96 unicorns with over $320 billion of valuation. Now, as we all know that unicorn is a mythological creature which is rare, and that's why it was unicorn. Perhaps it's time to rethink about the phrase unicorn. Should it be used or not? 96 is no exception, right? It's a startling number. And today, India has toppled Britain to be the number third ranked country after US and China to boast of such staggering numbers insofar as unicorns are concerned. Uh, Calendar year 21 itself witnessed 44 Indian startups becoming unicorn, and which is again no mean feat, especially in the wake of the pandemic. In fact, that acted as a catalyst, if anything. What are key sectors which witnessed this surge? No surprises there. Fintech, edtech, and software as services, SaaS as it is known as. All of them involves tech, and in a time when we have never ever been so dependent on tech, these are the sectors which are booming as well. Some of the unicorns actually were listed as well with a lot of fanfare, the likes of Zomato, Paytm, and Nykaa. And this is all looking very much to be continuing in the years to come. Now, what were the key factors which led to this boom and growth story? Some of the key factors was, of course, COVID. If you see, the surge actually played out during the COVID and post-COVID atmosphere. Now, because people were confined at their home, and because of deep internet penetration in India and great internet penetration, people at a click of their fingertips really could access technology, whether it was ordering hot food through Zomato, whether it was accessing anything over net to order something or shop something, you name it. Everything could have been done at click of a mouse or fingertips. So that really, the COVID coupled with technology and internet penetration led to a lot of, I would say, soaring success for startups in the tech space at least. Second of all, because a lot of this valuation was propelled by foreign investment, especially private equity and venture capital fund, including angel investors, it was high time that the startup entities woke up to the fact that their management and governance has to be top notch. And also the fact that ESG norms are something which is globally well known and recognized that one has to adhere with. So a lot of sea change has occurred insofar as professional management of these firms are concerned. So that's another factor which has contributed tremendously. One more factor, we should not miss out on the government's endeavors. It's very easy to criticize government. We all do that many times. But when the government deserves the pat on the back, we should give it. The government has done a lot of policy measures, including Startup India, Stand Up India, soaps insofar as tax is concerned, taking back the retroactive Vodafone tax, or for that matter, setting up funds to really boost Make in India and startup initiatives. So the government is really a pro-friendly government, and that is also reflected in the ease of doing business. India has leapfrogged ahead into top 100. It's currently hovering around 60, but I will not be surprised if India goes on to become in top 10 or 15 in near future. Last but not the least, I would say there's a tremendous amount of dry capital which is there to be deployed. You name all the who's of private equity venture capital funds, they are absolutely lining up, queuing up to really deploy their funds. Now, the third bucket is, will this growth continue to be sustained in light of what's playing out between different countries, the economic, geopolitical issues? I will stick my neck out and say absolutely yes, because India is an absolutely young, dynamic, growing economy, huge consumer base, which means that the demand and the pent-up demand for consumption will continue to surge, which means the entrepreneurs, the young Turks who come out in millions from business schools will continue to develop their ideas, and the fusion of foreign investment along with that and strong governance and a very sensible government at the helm and ROPS policies will ensure that this growth continues to be sustained. I hope that gives a quick snapshot about the unicorn story in India. Over to you, Mark.
Hey, thank you so much for that. And it's a compelling presentation. And that graph there is equally compelling. 44 is amazing. And I believe what's happened is year on year, India is now number 2, just behind the United States and ahead of China in producing unicorns for the last 2 or 3 years. Let me ask you one question that I think our audience might be interested in. You've listed a couple of these key sectors where we've seen these unicorn stampedes occurring. Where do you think the future is going to be in terms of other sectors for upcoming unicorns, and why?
Yeah, I think tech will continue to be one of the sectors where we will see a lot of interest, growth, and development. But amongst new sectors, I would say gaming is one sector which has a lot and lot of interest. Now, nowadays the with the advent of metaverse, and you see the young population, they're completely hooked up with PS4s and games and all that. So gaming sector will definitely continue to flourish and thrive in times to come. E-commerce driven sectors will also have a lot of role to play, and I believe they will also continue to witness a lot of surge. Those would be
All
two
right.
two of my sectors where I will put my money. Yeah.
PC, thank you so much for that. Really appreciate it. Now, in keeping with the ease of doing business or EODB issues that PC just talked about, we're going to go into something that's actually a pet subject of mine and also my colleague Roshnik Dalla, and that's space. They used to call it the final frontier, I think, in Star Trek, and I'm dating myself. I think it's just one of many frontiers. But Roshnik, let's hear from you about how India not only is easing doing business on Earth, but also up in the sky.
Thank you, Paku. Good morning and good evening to everybody. So over the next 5 minutes, I'm going to try to cover the Indian scenario on space today as we see it. So as of today, foreign direct investment in space is limited under, and you require the approval of the government of India. And government decides the approval based on a case-to-case basis. And often approvals are very restrictive and take some time. However, there has been positive and a lot of positive development in this sector over the past few months, rather. And right from February, when the space sector was introduced, where foreign direct investment, the government has actually decided to open up foreign direct investments to private equities, to foreign players. So that is one very important aspect, and we're going to see a foreign investment policy coming in very shortly, and hope that we get more investment there. Another aspect is the government has now realized that space is something that people are looking at, the world is looking at, and we have now since 2020 a nodal agency in India called InSpace. And this is an agency which going forward is going to be the interface with the foreign player. The agency will help foreigners set up, take approvals, whatever assistance is required, as well as provide them with the background, with the space available to kind of do their businesses. And so it will be a very challenging and very upkeeping new kind of a space initiative. Also recently, and in fact, as recently as 11th of April, we had a very unique and a very positive development in this sector. The India-US 2+2 ministerial dialogue has looked at space and has looked at a lot of things in this sector. So the key highlights, of course, was the signing of the MOU for a space situational awareness. This is basically an awareness program where the countries have decided to look at space, to look at any kind of objects which, come into space or are affecting terrorism, things like that. So there is an awareness into this area. Also, the government of India and the US are working very closely to launching of this new space satellite called NISAR, which is to be launched in 2023. And it's going to be doing a lot of studies in the scientific portions of Earth. And so a lot of stuff happening there. And the most important one is where the government has announced that they are going to be talking about defense and artificial intelligence dialogue in this sector. So we are seeing a lot of upward trend, a lot of movement from the government of both the countries, a lot of proactive starts. And I think this sector is definitely showing a very challenging and open outlook. Also, some of the benefits that we have realized over the past few months is that once we've seen since about 2020, when the government allowed private players to be a part of this sector, we've seen almost 75 private players have registered in this sector as of today, and we've seen investments of 10 to 11 million which have come in. And so we definitely think that there is a lot of opportunity, and everyone's waiting anxiously for the policy. So once we have the policy in place, it's going to be a good run for India for sure. So that's pretty much everything that I have on space today.
Nick, thanks very much, and that is really, really exciting developments. One of the questions I have for you is on the 2+2 ministerial dialogue that just occurred between the United States and India. Maybe this is a too simple question, but I take it that your thoughts are that the U.S. now believes that the India space sector is something viable to
Yes.
invest in, and if so, what are the changes that made that happen?
So the changes are, fortunately, the government themselves have realized that this is a space, so just before, in fact, the 2+2, since 2020, we had the finance minister who opened up the economy to private sectors. We had a lot of defense dialogues happening, a lot of agencies working towards doing this sector as a space, as a more regularized player. And I think with the US-India bilateral happening, the only positive I would say is that the world is definitely moving to a more bullish space sector. And over a period of time, in the next 5-10 years, you're going to see the sector definitely emerging. And India is going to be very, very focused on developing this space and doing well and contributing to the world economy. So that would be my thought for the next 5 years. We're going to see a lot of growth in this sector.
Wonderful, Roshnik. Thank you
Thank
so much for that, those exciting developments. Now, as mentioned, this is a section that we call Below the Radar, and it's covering a number of different topics, but some of these may not have hit your radar, but that's the whole purpose of this. So let me turn it over to my colleague, Zach, in our Mumbai office, and who's going to quickly run us through 4 pieces of information you might need to know. Go ahead, Zach.
Thanks, Paku, and hello, everyone. I have 4 updates today in Below the Radar, in this edition of Below the Radar. 2 are regulatory, 2 are judicial. The first is a dispute from the Delhi High Court, a trademark infringement suit filed by Snapdeal, who's one of the larger value deal players in the e-commerce space, against GoDaddy.com, who, as we know, is a domain name registrar. The sort of simply put, Snapdeal took GoDaddy to court, essentially asking for a takedown of various websites that had a similar mark, which was allowed. But the sort of interesting thing in this story is about how Snapdeal also asked for an injunction against any prospective users of the Snapdeal mark that would attempt to register on the domain name, or register their domain name. And the Delhi High Court said that, look, as long as there is no mark in existence, they can't give a prospective injunction that would sort of act in perpetuity. And effectively, the Delhi High Court held that once, as and when there is a sort of similar mark that comes to register with GoDaddy.com, Snapdeal would perhaps then have to approach the Delhi High Court and seek a takedown. But an injunction in perpetuity was, in that sense, refused. The second one is an interesting one and sort of takes from what PC spoke and alluded to earlier in the presentation, which is the Government of India's FinTech investment scheme. Now, this is important because the government has sort of been pushing this idea of having a gift city in Gujarat, which is supposed to have sort of the same contours as the international financial centers across the globe. Now, the FinTech investment scheme attempts or is sort of an incentive scheme that the government has come out with grants of USD 20,000 to about 100,000 USD, depending on the stage of the fintech startup. But the idea is that if you come to the government and apply to the government, saying that you have an idea that can aid in the provision of financial products or financial services, and you also sort of want to operate within the gift city, and this applies to both Indian as well as foreign players. The FinTech investment scheme allows for very attractive grants. But although there is a sort of a bunch of regulation that is expected to sort of iron out more details on this. But very interesting in terms of the incentivizing in the gift city. The third update is from the competition regulator. And this is interesting because this has to do with a tussle between broadcasters and local channel service providers. Really, the dispute here had to do with how, and really in that sense, our competition law is still an evolving one. But the dispute here had to do with how entities like Star and Disney were offering channels to distributors at a discriminatory or sort of a discounted rate to certain distributors as opposed to the others. And on that basis, the Competition Commission ordered an investigation into these affairs. Now, what's interesting here is that instead of going down the route of sort of cooperating with the investigation, one of the sort of frequent strategies employed or deployed is to go to a high court in its writ jurisdiction. And effectively, what the High Court in Bombay has done is that it's directed or permitted the the Director General to continue his investigation. But at the same time, I said that, look, the CCI or the Competition Commission is to not come out with any conclusive findings till such time that the Bombay High Court sort of comes out with a finding on whether there are sort of anti-competitive practices. The last is again a regulatory update on digital banking, on the guidelines around digital banking units. And the idea is this is sort of on the heels of what our finance minister announced at the budget, which is to really integrate commercial banks into the digital space, because it does seem like there is amongst the more rural areas in India a lack or an exclusion on digital infrastructure. And the idea behind these guidelines is to sort of incentivize digital players to tie up with commercial banks and sort of set up those digital banking units for them. That's it from me. And I thought sort of these are developing stories which we think will sort of develop with time. And we hope to carry, we'll sort of keep you updated as and when these stories develop.
Zach, thank you for
Over to
that
you,
tour.
Parth.
Thank you, Zach, for that tour de force coverage of a number of different topics and well within a 5-minute time frame. And yes, we do appreciate Zach covered a lot. We'll give you an email address if you want any more details on any of these, but thanks so much, Zach. Now, let's turn it over to Tanu Banerjee to talk about gaming. And just in keeping with the theme that PC mentioned earlier about possible unicorns developing, it looks like there's some major developments in the gaming sector that might help that stampede arise with the gaming sector. So over to you, Tanu.
Thanks, Paku. And absolutely, at the beginning of this session, Prasenjit spoke about how COVID became a catalyst to growth of the tech sector in India. And online gaming industry is no different. In fact, it has absolutely boomed in the last 2 years in India. Last year, to just put some numbers in perspective, last year in 2021, investments in the online gaming sector were close to $450 million, which was a 108% increase compared to the year before that, which is 2020. In the next 3 years, the gaming sector is expected to be a $5 billion industry in India. So definitely one of the most promising sectors at the moment. But despite the outstanding growth at an operational level, a big challenge for the gaming industry in India continues to be that since gaming, gambling, or betting are state-specific subjects, each Indian state has the power to enact laws to regulate gaming in their territory. Now, some states have adopted the central legislation, which is the Public Gambling Act, and others have enacted their own state-specific legislation. Most of these distinguish between games of skill and games of chance, and overall general principle being that games of skill are considered legal and games of chance are prohibited. In today's session, we will cover 2 recent gaming law updates. The first is a very welcome decision of the Karnataka High Court, and the second is about a recent online gaming bill. To start with the Karnataka High Court decision, last year in around October, the Karnataka state government had amended the Karnataka Police Act. And in this amendment, it prohibited online games of skill which were played for cash. Now, this ban had a very unsettling effect on the online gaming players, since all online games that were played on payment of some sort of money were outrightly banned in Karnataka. Consequently, the amendment was therefore challenged before the High Court by many stakeholders, including All India Gaming Federation, several online gaming platforms, and even individuals, on the grounds that it was arbitrary, firstly, because it prohibited even a game of skill which was otherwise considered legal. And second, that it failed to make a distinction between games of skill and games of chance. Um, Eventually, the High Court stuck around the provisions of the Act which prohibited games of skill. And it also observed that the state government lacks the legislative competence to enact or even amend the legislation. And further, that it's unconstitutional given that it treated games of skill and games of chance at par, and therefore questioned the sweeping effect of the ban. Overall, the order was very, very well received by the industry players, and it definitely played a role in solidifying legality of online gaming in India. Uh, the next item on the segment is the more recent Online Gaming Regulation Bill 2022, which was introduced, in fact, on the 1st of April this month itself. Now, this bill aims to introduce a overall regulatory regime for online gaming and to prevent fraud and misuse in the online gaming world. It defines online gaming as very quite broadly. It says online gaming is any game that is played on an electronic device. And therefore, it sort of covers within its ambit both games of skill and games of chance. Some key highlights of what the bill proposes. First, it contemplates setting up of an online gaming commission by the central government. This commission is proposed to have oversight on the functioning of online gaming websites, and it can eventually take measures to curb illegal online gaming in India. Second, the gaming operators will be required to obtain a license from this gaming commission. Uh, it also has an exclusion for backend services like hosting or maintenance services, which are provided to international gaming websites which are based outside of India, but perhaps the services are provided from India. Uh, at a broad level, quick thoughts on the bill. In its proposed form, unfortunately, the bill still looks a bit scanty, and it doesn't perhaps have the depth or the robustness that the gaming industry in India currently needs, given its growth and promise. For example, it does not draw a distinction between real money gaming and casual gaming, when the need of the hour is in fact to have a framework for the real gaming money platforms. It's also unclear because gaming still continues to be a state-specific subject. It's unclear how this will interplay with different state legislations. Um, that's it on this segment from my end. We'll keep you updated on what happens to the bill eventually. Back to you, Paku.
Tanu, thank you very much. Let me ask you one question on this. I know that this whole issue of online gaming in India has sort of had fits and starts, stop and go, stop and go. But with the Karnataka High Court decision and now the proposed online gaming bill, do you see that, generally speaking, that issue of online gaming is generally a settled one, or do you still think that there may be challenges at the broad level?
Interesting question, Paku. As much as, of course, the Karnataka High Court decision gives the legality of online gaming a lot more teeth, especially because it also comes right after similar judgments from other peer high courts in India, like the Madras High Court and Kerala High Courts, which sort of upheld legality of skill-based online gaming as well. But unfortunately, these are still judicial precedents, right? So to say that this is the final word perhaps is a bit inaccurate at this point. What we really need and what the industry needs is to have a uniform central policy that sort of, codifies and puts together the governing principles of online gaming in India. But the flavor does seem to be that it is viable for sure. It's just that there is, an absence of a central policy that says that. But we're looking forward for the government to put that together soon.
All right, great. Thank you so much, Thanu. And finally, let's get to our last segment. And before I do that, let me just remind everybody, as Jay has indicated in the chat, please do put any questions. We'll cover those right after Nishad's segment on the Advertising Standards Council of India's recent guidelines on advertisements related to cryptocurrency and non-fungible tokens. Nishad, over to you. You're on
Thank you,
mute,
Parth.
Nishad. Okay, great.
Yes.
Thanks.
A very good day to all of you. So before I delve into this short slide of mine, we are all quite familiar with what virtual digital assets are. They are basically presently in two forms. They are the various cryptocurrencies that we've seen, which is the Bitcoins and the Dodges, which have been floating around. And then the new concept of non-fungible tokens, or NFTs as they are popularly known. The second aspect in this context is the trading platforms which have emerged, whereby you are permitted to buy, sell, and transact in these virtual digital assets and generate income out of these virtual digital assets. Now, there has been a significant and huge demand in respect of these virtual digital assets, be that cryptocurrencies or NFTs, over a period of time. And these assets and the value of these assets has been extremely volatile. As you would have seen, simple tweets by certain influential people uh, results in a huge amount of volatility in the value of these assets. Uh, at the same time, there has been a increase in advertising of these assets, and it has been quite aggressive. These advertisements also include a lot of celebrities. Now, the virtual digital assets are not regulated in India. They were initially going to be banned because of the fact that they're extremely volatile. There's no base asset value, etc. But in the recent past, since November, there was a prime minister chaired a high level committee where discussions took place. And then there was a proceeding before the Delhi High Court where regulation of advertisements in relation to these virtual digital assets was being considered. And then finally, there was the budget of 2022, which introduced a tax of 30% on any income which is generated from trading in these virtual digital assets. That's the first time that virtual digital assets actually came to be defined in some form of statute in India. Otherwise, there is no other regulation or statute which really deals with these virtual digital assets. Now, coming to the regulations, and before I come to the regulations, what is ASCII? ASCII, as we call it, ASCI, is the Advertising Standards Council of India. Is it a statutory body? It is not. It's a self-regulatory body, which comprises of members who are advertising agencies, advertising platforms, media houses, and the industry in general. The purpose of this body has been to protect consumer interests and to ensure that any advertisements which are made are truthful, honest, not misleading, not harmful to the consumers, right? There are there's a base code, and then there are other regulations which govern specific sectors also, like automobiles, education. There are specific guidelines which talk about online gaming, influencers, and how celebrities should also conduct themselves in the course of appearing in advertisements. Now, the purpose of the advertising guidelines, or the guidelines for advertising of virtual digital assets and linked services, was to ensure that advertisements with regard to virtual digital assets were regulated in a manner where they will not be misleading for consumers. These came to be published on the 23rd of February 2022 and were to take effect from 1st of April. Now, all advertisements which are relating to digital virtual assets, virtual digital assets, from the 1st of April are required to comply with these guidelines. And those advertisements which were existing prior to 1st of April, if they have to continue, will have to comply with these guidelines from the 15th of April. Now, these are quite exhaustive guidelines which have been published, and they take care of advertisements in all forms. So they may be print, they may be static, they may be video advertisements, audio advertisements, social media posts, or even disappearing stories on platforms like Instagram or Facebook and the like. They are quite exhaustive. They speak of the size, the positioning. For example, it has and several other factors of how advertisements should be made in each of these forms. The principal thing that has been introduced is that all advertisements relating to virtual digital platforms or virtual digital assets must have a disclaimer, and that should specifically mention that these crypto products and NFTs are unregulated and can be highly risky. And secondly, that if there is any loss from any transactions relating to these virtual digital assets, then there is not going to be any regulatory recourse to it. So this disclaimer has to be clearly set out, and how this disclaimer has to be set out in each of these forms that I mentioned, video, audio, etc., have been very specifically set out in a detailed manner in these guidelines. The other two aspects that have been regulated are that the first thing is you cannot compare them with regulated assets. So you can't compare them with, say, currencies which are regulated, custodians, depositories, etc. And the second thing is, in the course of advertising these assets on platforms, you are not supposed to make any promises that there will be any generation of profits or revenues in trading from this. The third part is that the celebrity guidelines, which are general guidelines of ASCII, would apply to any celebrities who are advertising these virtual digital assets. The guidelines also prohibit the use of any minors for the purposes of advertising these assets. And lastly, and most importantly, it prohibits the downplaying of risks involved in trading with these digital assets. I think that's all from me.
Shad, thank you so much. And you're an IP, intellectual property expert. Let me just ask you a question a little bit outside of the ASCII guidelines that have just been introduced, but with NFTs, do you see any trends in India or around the world, but particularly with respect to NFTs originating from India, about associating intellectual property rights with the NFT?
This is a very interesting question, Paku, and I'm glad you asked this. So NFTs, from what I understand, do not really relate to, or do not necessarily relate to, a transfer of intellectual property. What it does is it creates a digital asset. For example, I'm an artist. I've created a painting. I create a digital format of that painting. And then it is that digital asset which is transferred by virtue of the NFT. It's like a collectible. So you may hold that asset, but you may not hold the intellectual properties in that asset. You may not be in a position to further transmit or exploit intellectual properties in that asset. It's about holding a collectible. That's my overall understanding of it. But yes, if the creator or the author of that particular work is willing to grant those intellectual properties, there is nothing that prohibits you from doing so. But generally, there has till date not been a transfer of the intellectual property in the digital asset.
Nishad, thank you so much. And now that's the end of our 5 segments. Jay, let me turn it over to you for any questions that we have from the audience or that you may have of my colleagues.
Wonderful. I'm going to ask participants, now would be the time to raise your hand or come on video and ask a question. I want to thank you and your team. There is not a single segment, and I live and breathe this all the time, that I did not learn something. So, but I actually have a couple of questions myself, and I'm just going to start with Nishad just because it's top of mind. You're talking about ASCII and a lot of the guidelines. What happens if ASCII rules that somebody is in breach of these guidelines? What happens next? Is it binding? Is there recourse? Does it go to the courts? What's the next step?
Yes. So that's also a very good question. As I indicated to you, it's a self-regulatory body, right? So it comprises of several members coming from across the industry, advertising platforms, advertising agencies, media houses, etc. So the regulations really bind the members contractually. So the question is, if you're not a member, are you not bound by those? So what happens is, because the media houses, etc., are members, they would normally be bound by the decisions. And therefore, indirectly, any non-member who's come up with an advertisement would also be bound indirectly. Because more often than not, the advertising houses, media houses would take cognizance of any decision or recommendation which has been given by ASCII, and they would pull down an advertisement which is not in compliance. And of course, the ASCII code itself provides for a mechanism where there's a review which is handled by an ex-retired High Court judge. There have been litigations around it. So it is fairly regulated in that manner as well.
Yeah, a follow-up in other segments. I mean, the government of India seems really focused on self-regulatory organizations, and so we see them popping up in other areas. Is ASCII exclusive, or are there other similar organizations out there? Because in other segments, the government is permitting multiple self-regulatory organizations, a bit of self-selection.
Yes, there have been bodies of various industries, yes. But I think ASCII has been the main organization because it has representation across industries, as I said, media houses, advertising platforms. So it's in that sense, all encompassing. And they have been having a lot of tie-ups with government agencies also. So in fact, they've been assisting government agencies on and off in regulating advertisements in various sectors. So for example, in the food sector, they were tied up with the FSSAI, and the like.
Please come down, Matthias.
Tanu, I have a question about gaming. And it's sort of jumping into the political arena. There's now a bill in Parliament. Which committee is looking at this? Sometimes bills like the copyright bill sit in Parliament for a long time. Can you give us a little sense if there's going to be hearings, which committee, engagement? Do we think it's going to pass? Give us a little bit of some of the political background on this.
Right. There is a good question, but the bill is proposed by the central government currently. It's not as if there are other sectors in media which the Ministry of Broadcasting looks at. We also have METI that looks at the technology side of things. But for the gaming space, there's no specific department as such within the government at the moment. So the bill is not initiated from there. And therefore, there is, of course, this on the gaming side, there is this continued complexity around what the central government would want to put in place as regulations and what the state governments would want, which is what I was saying, that is a constant complexity in the gaming space.
Thank you. Thank you. I want to move to Roshnik and ask a question around space. In the United States, private sector, even in the most highly classified arenas, including the DoD and other three-letter agencies, the private sector plays a clear, active, proactive, embedded role. Now, if there is going to be some space dialogue that will have military implications, how is India's sort of defense sector from a commercial point of view? Does that align? Is there a lot of commercial activity, and will it align with how the U.S. looks at it in terms of focused on warfighter capabilities, or do we think that there might be a misalignment and therefore will take some time for the private sector, commercial industry, to sort of get involved in sort of bilateral military space activities?
So,
An easy question.
Yes. This is something that, somebody else had even asked me that what is the scenario? What do you think we can invest in the space? Do you think defense will open up? Now, defense per se is regulated for India and for Indian FDI, sectors as well. So I would agree that India should take a proactive view the way US has and allow private sectors to get into this space. But a lot is going to be seen through this new dialogue, which is going to open up, and we're yet to estimate. But my sense would be for private players into the space sector for defense is going to take some time. It's going to be more in terms of, setting up satellites or operating, things like that. But specifically in the defense, we are going to have to wait for some more time, I think. But that will also happen because the government is realizing, and there's the whole concept of geospatial data and information that is being available now is open to everybody. Everybody knows what's going on, and so it's something that we must look forward to. But yes, India should be more proactive in that area. That's going to take some time, though.
I would like to make a small comment on this aspect, if I'm permitted. Having
Please go ahead.
served in the defense sector and having been associated with the National Security Council for a fair amount of time, and now handling the policy component at the Indian Space Association, and having interacted with the people from the system, I feel that there is a strong realization in the system that collaborative efforts are the way forward. The space sector has certain unique characteristics, which mean that the investments required are high, the risk factor is high, the gestation periods are long, the return of investments are long, and unlike other sectors, there is defense is a dual use sector, right? So there are the common technologies which sometimes you use for civilian applications as well as military applications. So I think the appetite is there. Fair amount of changing of mindsets has taken place. I think the Honorable Prime Minister, with his Atmanirbhar Bharat program, has given the right injection into the mindsets that self-reliance and collaborative efforts are the way forward. Yes, it may take some time building of a lot of trust factor, because as we see, there are national interests that govern things when they fall into the military domain. And there will be, and how we manage the trust factor is going to be something which will be important when dual use technologies, especially for consumption into the defense sector, get concerned. I think some amount of effort has already started. A lot of our startups, promising startups, have been talking to various companies across in US. They are supported by the funds from overseas. So things are happening. People from within the system are talking to them. I think that is a positive way forward. A lot of policy initiatives have been initiated by the government, both in terms of the integrated national space policy, which we recently discussed threadbare in, I think, just about a month and a half back. And now we eagerly await the space activities bill, because that is going to be the big enabler for real space, private sector space activities in this country. We must also note that the Indian space system was primarily ISRO-centric till the government changed the gears in the last 1 or 2 years. And now, with commercial activities having been given the kind of push that we are seeing, it would take some time for the right kind of demand generation to take place. And I think in case a good synergy has to develop between the companies from both countries, then we would need to see how we ensure the scalability and survivability of these companies by jointly probably capturing markets outside, so that the inertia of opening up of the Indian system is taken care of while the companies grow and make money and stabilize themselves. But overall, if we see, I think it's a promising way ahead. And we from the Indian Space Association and many other associations, I would say, because I talk as India And we all are working in a very collaborative way. In fact, we have our friends from SIA also here. So we all are working together hand in hand to see how we build that environment where a lot of space activity in the defense sector also takes place, and how we can engage with our friends from United States and see these relationships getting stronger and more effective in delivering some meaningful and effective business relationships and solutions. Thank you.
Thank you, Satyam. That's very helpful. I really appreciate those comments. Rajiv, you have your hand raised. If you want to come on screen as well, that would be great.
Hi. Am I audible?
Yes.
Okay, thanks. That's the first thing we do these days. Check up if we are audible. Goes back to the Graham Bell days, where he says, "Can you listen to me?" Okay. Regarding the FDI on the space sector, it still needs a sectoral permission. Do you see that as a complication? The question is for team at the Khaitan company. Do you see that as a complication or as an additional bump in international companies trying to come and set up facilities here?
Thank you. And I presume that you're focused on sort of SATCOM or geospatial, sort of the segmentation of space companies. So Rashnik, if you could respond to that. Thank you.
Yes. So yes, presently you are correct. There is a lot of government control in the space sector. But as I told you, things are changing. But as of today, if someone wants to, so foreign investment, of course, is not allowed as of today. But if an Indian private player wants to get into the sector, then they have a lot of support now from the sector. But I think there is going to be, we don't know how much FDI is going to be eventually allowed in this sector, and what is the government's thought on, the balance between foreign investment and national players, etc. So that's something we'll have to see. Also, once the policy is actually officially released, we will know what are the, parameters or approvals that these sectors will require. So really, as far as foreign investment is concerned, I would say we will have to wait out a couple of months and, see what pans out of this policy when it is really introduced. But today it is difficult for a foreign investor to definitely set up, and it is not very simplified as of today. And approvals do take time. We know that approvals take time, but we also know that the government is definitely pushing to change this entire system. And with in-space coming into the one-phase interference, the portal, I think it's going to become much simpler and an easier way to go forward. So everything is going to fall in place. It's just a couple of months that one needs to wait and watch what is happening. But definitely something good is going to come out of this.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you.
A final question for Prasenjit, in terms of the unicorns. There's been a lot of talk in our conversation today about gaming, advertising, and commercial space. SpaceX is one of the very well-known, if you could call it a unicorn in the United States, that gets a lot of play. Did anything you hear today sort of make you think about forward-looking opportunities of unicorns, where they might come from?
Oh, yes, absolutely. I think both gaming and sports as well as space, I think, are the sectors which are currently with a lot of promise. And I think there are a lot of takers, a lot of enthusiasm, a lot of interest amongst the Indian public. And we're talking about 1.3 billion people here. So a lot of people we're talking about here who have a significant kind of interest in this space. So I will not at all be surprised that if the law not only becomes more, shall we say, customer friendly and more importantly, investor friendly, but also this ends up becoming not only unicorn in terms of valuation, but also possibly translate into real profitability for these companies.
And I have to ask one follow-up there. There seems to me anecdotally that I was in Silicon Valley, and a lot of the startups and unicorns are targeting or thinking about the United States, is there a lot of back-end connectivity? Are a lot of the founders either Indian Americans or have studied in America? Are they getting capital? What's the international connections, if you might, from some of these startups and unicorns?
Well, I think it's an interesting question. A lot of the background of the entrepreneurs, firstly, they're very young. They're young in late 20s, early 30s. They have, most of them actually gone abroad to study, not necessarily the US, but they have been exposed to good quality education. And that's why the ideas, keep on journeying from their minds. Insofar as the support of US, especially, yes, from the private equity and venture capital funding is concerned, that is where we see a lot of support pouring in, really, a lot of dry capital from the funds. But not necessarily, I would say, Indo-American background. And I think, of course, there's a lot to learn because, as I said, US is the trailblazer, isn't it, in terms of unicorns. That's where it all started and still remains number one. And India has lots to kind of catch up and learn and imbibe, so to speak. But a lot of this credit goes to, as I said, the young entrepreneurs, the young Turks who are coming out of college. Many have failed or dropped out of colleges, but have turned around their life into something magical, brimming with confidence, ideas, funding, and good policies. All of them blend together, you get a unicorn, isn't it?
Wonderful. Paku, over to you for any final comments.
Hey, first of all, thank you and the U.S.-India Business Council for your friendship and partnership and letting us do this show. I absolutely want to thank all of my colleagues from Khaitan & Co. for their wonderful briefings. I find these things fascinating myself, just like Jay. And I think most of all, to our audience, thank you so much for the participation, joining us today, and hope to see you in a few weeks when we do our next newscast. And until then, stay safe and take care. Bye.
And thank you. And I also want to thank Aloy Mahapatra from the Khaitan team. He's very instrumental in the back end. Thank you, Aloy, for making these easy and informative. And of course, let me thank our members and others for participating. We appreciate your time and interest. We will make these slides available. We will make this recording available as well. And please do not hesitate to reach out to me. Happy to connect you with any of the experts today. And we're happy to take ideas for future topics. With that, please enjoy the rest of your mornings, the rest of your evenings, and stay healthy and be well.
Thank you, everybody. Bye-bye.
Bye.
Thank you. Have a good day.
Thank you. Good day.